Record. Hey, everybody out there in social media land. Happy Friday. My name's Helen. I'm with NASW New Jersey, and I am thrilled to be here with Juan Rios and Cortney Harding. They are keynoting our conference on May 2nd. The title of their talk is the reality of virtual reality in social work. I'm sorry, my phone just went off and it totally freaked me. But anyway, welcome Cortney and Juan.
Hi.
Hey, Helen. Thanks for having me. Thanks for having us, actually.
Yeah.
So the reality of virtual reality in social work, what's the big deal? Why is this important?
I'll jump in and sort of talk about the tangible results, right? Because that's, at the end of the day, this is cool technology. It's fun to talk about. It's fun to think about, but you all have bosses and those bosses are like, sounds fun, show me the numbers. So I'll share some numbers with you. So Accenture has done a project with child welfare workers in particular to help them train to do family interviews and really be empathetic conversationalists and ask good questions. So the result of that is the state of Indiana started using it, and within 6 months, their caseworker turnover rate dropped by 31%, saving the state and taxpayers millions of dollars. The state of Georgia started using it, and this was right before the pandemic. So of course, in-person training then went away. They kept using VR training, and they found that they saved like 75% of their training costs and had just as good, if not better, results. So again, you're talking about efficacy, you're talking about cutting turnover, which I know is a huge issue. You're talking about cost savings to, taxpayers and social work departments. So I think that's where the rubber really hits the road is, yeah, this stuff is fun and cool and amazing, but it also has really tangible results.
Yeah. And if I may, just really considering our profession of social work, which is, truly centered around social justice, human dignity, and worth of the person. Thinking about all the social issues that are currently, at play, how are we as social workers really thinking about emerging technologies such as virtual reality to meet some of the gaps in service delivery? What are the new ways of engaging in clinical work? What does this mean when we think of virtual spaces and metaspaces and what's happening? And I think social work particularly, when we're centered around the human experience, we have to have this conversation. We have to really truly engage in being able to consult as well with a lot of these tech companies, folks that are building the software, the programs, because oftentimes they're missing important ethical marks that we as a profession have the insight, have the experience, and remind us of bringing in that humanity piece within the tech spaces.
And that's such an incredibly important point. And I think we're at an inflection point right now where we have an opportunity to do something really good, which is, the current internet that we have, Web 2 or whatever people are calling it, was very much sort of built willy-nilly. It was not built with a lot of intentionality. Some guy in Silicon Valley had a cool idea and all of a sudden it's a huge company and all of a sudden, oops, there's Nazis everywhere. That's the story we see over and over again, which is terrifying. So now that we're entering this phase with like Web3 and the Metaverse, and I know these are buzzy terms, but what we have here is a cool opportunity to build from the ground up, to make a space that is inclusive, that is welcoming, that is kind, that we can start solving some of these problems that we've had with the current internet around harassment, around, a lack of diversity, around all of discrimination, all these issues. So the more people who want to be part of this and weigh in on this, the better, right? We want people to feel like they can build this next world as a community without sort of having one or two geniuses out in San Francisco control everything. So that's what's really important right now in the space.
Right. So I'm curious. I know, Helen, you have a list of questions, but I definitely want to talk directly to Cortney because she's just amazing and what she particularly is doing in these spaces. She's inviting us as a profession to begin to have, not just begin, but to continue this dialogue. And what she's done is just so phenomenal and leading the way in regards to how do we integrate it practically into our profession. So I guess, Cortney, if you could just talk about where do you see social workers in these spaces of virtual reality? You know, why do you think it's important for us, particularly? I can speak to it, right? Because I can theorize it, but from someone working within the company and you built it out with child protective service workers, where else do you see it going, and why do you think it's important for the social workers to be involved?
So I think there's a couple different answers. And the first is really building specifically VR experiences for diversity, equity, inclusion, and social impact. So that's what my primary focus is. My company has built its experiences around like workplace inclusion, racial bias, mental health. So having people that can consult with us as subject matter experts to tell those stories in a way that is really inclusionary. And, you know, one thing that I was called in for a while ago with some of the pieces that I worked on earlier is sometimes we didn't consult the right people, right? So making sure that a lot of people have input and have voices. So I think that's one part of it, is making sure that social workers are helping guide some of the content. I think with the broader sort of metaverse question, it's really understanding, especially if you deal with young people, this is a subject matter you need to know about. There was a New York Times piece 3 or 4 years ago about like how therapists all had to learn about tarot cards, right? And I know that's kind of silly and jokey, but the truth is young people in particular are already in the space, right? Like people our age, people in their, adults, some of us are more into it than others, but generally we are not day-to-day users for the most part. Children are in Roblox all day. They're in Fortnite all day. They are they're very involved in this. And so if you work with a younger population, understanding those spaces and what happens in those spaces and how you can manage those spaces is a real asset and something you really need to know, because kids will come to you and say, somebody harassed me in Roblox. And if you're like, what's a Roblox? Then that kid's not going to want to open up as much or have that type of conversation. And understanding at least like, what is this? Okay, how does harassment in Roblox look different than harassment at a school or at on the internet? Understanding that, I think, is really critical. And as we move forward, it's only going to get bigger and bigger. So having a really foundational understanding of this space, A, you can help build safe spaces in it, and B, you can understand what people are going through when they talk about issues they're having.
Right. That reminds me of, I'm in private practice and I meet with clients, and there's also this component of when you have this knowledge of these metaspaces, now you're able to also use that therapeutically. And, how do we look, I have one client who had agoraphobia, but in Legends, you're collaborating, you're building teams, you're building worlds, and you're strategizing, and there are all these really cool things that in the physical world that he was not able to do, that in this meta and virtual world, that this sort of creativeness, this collaborativeness, this entirely new identity able to be formed, and pulling from that in order to balance off whatever he was telling himself about himself that was creating a negative. So using also these spaces as therapeutic tools to enhance the therapeutic alliance, to enhance the therapeutic relationship, to utilize it as ways of also healing. So I'm a big fan of Jane McGonigal, who's a futurist, and she recently wrote this book called Unimaginable. It takes up a perspective that we also have to have urgent optimism, and not just this newer perspective of the future, that we still can, and we all can engage in creating and designing the future we want to live in, but that's only if we're engaged and we're involved. And I know so many people out there are like disconnected in social work about virtual reality, the metaverse, augmented reality, extended reality, all these buzzy words, terms, as you mentioned, but we have to lean into the uncomfort, learn about it, because it's going to be designed for us.
I mean, think about how many therapists are like on TikTok right now, right? I mean, that was something 5 years ago. TikTok was, I think it was in the US, but it was a site where people like did dances, right? And now it's something where you can reach your populations and you can be part of it. And at least you need to know what it is, right? And it's the same. And it's interesting when you talk about, the metaverse, because like a lot of us, I think, who were, seeing therapists or seeing social workers or working in person, COVID happened. And now a lot of people have moved or things have changed, and they're still doing, telehealth, essentially, either Zoom therapy, phone therapy, whatever. And that's great. And certainly it worked well during COVID. But now with the metaverse, you can actually see people in a more physical space. There's more presence, right? It feels like you are, even though you're not actually there, you are actually there. So it's this really cool thing where like you could have appointments in the metaverse and feel like people are actually present with you, even though you're by yourself. And so I think sort of spinning out, how can we grow in these different spaces? What can we do in these different spaces? How can we build spaces that feel safe for everyone? How can we build spaces that are welcoming for everyone? Like one of my big things is representative avatars.
Yes.
So if you are doing—
Please, thank you.
Yeah, so here's the thing, right? I think avatars need to be one pole or the other, which is one, everyone's a duck, which I kind of love and which I think is fun to experiment with. Right? If everyone just looks the same, if everyone's a duck or a cat or a whatever, awesome. And the other is you need to have these really representative avatars because there are people who cannot express themselves in daily life, who can't express themselves in the metaverse. And so if someone is non-binary or trans and exploring that identity, being able to do it in a safe space in the metaverse can be a really amazing first step. And also setting up, and this is something I've been talking about recently, and it's a little off to the left of center or whatever, but guidelines around how you represent yourself in the metaverse and what isn't ethical to represent yourself as. So like, can you play with your gender identity, even though that's not how you represent yourself in real life? And, what if people are coming in doing drag as sort of an insult rather than a celebration? So really thinking through all those different things. And as we build this equitable metaverse, creating a series of norms around that. So, people feel safe and included.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I don't think that's off center at all. I think that's dead on center. And what we're not considering sort of, what are the conversations around representation and who I decide to become, and am I becoming a bad actor because the liberation of what exists in these spaces. But also there's that healing component that I could be whatever I want to be and whoever I want to be.
Yeah.
Express that in these spaces, and as whether it's or your coming out process or just expressing the spectrum of who we are as human beings. Boxes. So I totally get your on center with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because people sort of joke about furry communities in the metaverse, and on one hand that has become kind of a trope, but on the other hand, like it's a safe space for people to express their desires, and that's great. And it's all, as long as it's all consensual and all of that stuff, like it's kind of an amazing safe space to have. And the other thing I think about is either the hyper representation, which is people being fully represented, or the sort of blind audition nature of the metaverse, which is everyone's a duck. You can do the voice hiding thing where you sound like you're auto-tuned. Right. And then think of how like job interviews would go. Think of how, meetings would go when everyone's a duck with a robot voice. All of a sudden, whose voices are getting heard more? Who's actually getting to speak more, right? Like that's the type of stuff we can play with. And I don't have the answers. I haven't done any like actual research on this because that would be so fun. Oh my gosh.
I mean, but we can.
Yeah, we can. Like that's the next step potentially is like, how can this be used? How can like robot voices and duck avatars be used for equality and change? Like that's rad. Like let's play with that.
Yeah. And reducing othering and implicit biases and job, like you said, job interviews. I love that. What does the therapeutic process look like if we're both ducks with these? Does that shift and change our ability to connect and who we decide to act or want to be a therapist? And I love that. Another consideration that just thinking about emerging technology, virtual reality, this recent paper that came out, I think it's out of Oxford, in which they studied the tilt brush in the virtual spaces in order to, as a tool to reduce and address post-traumatic stress disorder, trauma, and that sense of creativity in these spaces are also being researched therapeutically. Okay, how do we now use tilt brush not only to engage our creativity, but in order to work through some of the PTSD and trauma?
And there's a lot of interesting stuff in that space.
This is an amazing conversation. I've been writing notes. So social workers, we're change agents, we're on the ground, we're frontline, we're essential workers. What's a couple of things that people can expect to take away from your absolutely fascinating conversation at conference?
Oh, I don't know. We're talking about ducks. Like, I don't know, ducks, cats. Like, the thing that I really want to do with all my work, and especially with this talk, is really help people understand that this technology exists, obviously exists. It is not that hard to get into, right? And one challenge that I have that I'm trying to solve is a lot of examples are not publicly available. So getting people into headsets, getting them to think about how do we create content, what are the steps we need to take, how do we start working with this, and then really just sort of demystifying it. Because like once you get in a headset and start playing and you learn it, it's actually not that hard. It's kind of like when I've got my little brick here on the charger next to me. Like the first time I got this thing, I took a few days to like learn how to type on it and figure it out. Now it's glued to my hand 24/7, which is also not great. But so helping people understand that this technology might seem intimidating, it might seem scary. It's really not. And it really is something that you need to be part of because you have an opportunity to help shape this future. And the more you know and the more you're engaged, the better.
Yeah. I plus one that times 1,000. I think what Courtney's mentioning is phenomenal and exactly where we need to be in spaces. I also would like to amplify the importance of us as a profession, not only engaging these conversations, but thinking about what are the practicality in integrating emerging technology, because technology is changing at a rapid pace. So it's not focusing on just virtual reality. Okay, virtual is one small, outdated tool now, frankly, that's building upon something greater. It's amazing, and VR is so good, but there's something the next week, there's going to be something else. And the week after that, something else. And if we're not having this conversation about how do we apply the use of virtual reality now, when holograms are going to be here very, very shortly, what would that look like? And we're not having that conversation. What would it look like when we're just having, spending 4 to 5, 6 hours a day in the metaverse through work and gaming and collaboration and building worlds and therapy, and we're not having that conversation now just about virtual reality. So to me, virtual reality is huge important, and to me it's like the first version of the iPhone. Great.
You're right.
Yeah, it's super great. We're like, oh, I'm not gonna do this, I'm not gonna do that, I'm not gonna do this. That's fantastic, but the iPhone 10 is coming out really, really quickly, y'all. And if we are not just getting used to the typing piece, like, Courtney mentioned, the trajectory for growth, we're going to be our fists at the moon and at the sun and saying, oh, why didn't someone include me on this conversation? Exactly. Rather than us building these tables to be included in the conversation.
Exactly. Yeah. Couldn't agree more.
Beautiful. Oh my goodness. I can't wait for next Monday. It's
going to be so fun.
Cortney and Juan will be speaking on Monday, May 2nd at the 2022 NASW New Jersey Virtual Annual Conference. And I know we're really behind Juan with the virtual reality, but we're trying to catch up with you. We really are. So
not too late.
Exactly. Never, ever, ever, ever too late. We got this.
Yep, totally. Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate your time. Can't wait for this conversation to continue.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you on May 2nd.
See you on May 2nd. My birthday. So be
Taurus. What's up, Taurus? May 6th. What's up, Tauruses? Horns up. Oh my gosh.
Oh my God.
All right,
y'all. Oh my God.
See you later.